Hey guys, welcome to Franklin Woodworks. After my last disastrous project, I still needed to make a table. So I won't bore you with the steps I took, but I'll just say they were the same all the way up to and including the glue up. Well, in that first project, I came up with a way to use a router circle jig without putting a hole in the top of the table. Of course, I could have put a screw in the center of the bottom of the table, but I wanted to try something different, and it turned out well. But I still haven't got over my phobia of routers. I admit it, I'm scared of them. Although in the last video, I expressed my confidence in router use based on the numerous mistakes I've made and learned from, but to be honest, I got a little sweaty thinking of using the circle jig for the router again. So I wanted to come up with another way. I've cut circles on the table saw for many projects, but none that were bigger than around 10 inches. This table is going to be 37 inches. But is the principle any different? The more I thought about it, the more I came to the conclusion that it would be the same process. Being able to cut something this large will be dependent on the size of your table saw, but I'm fortunate in that my table saw will allow me to have a fully supported jig that will cut a 54-inch table. So this should be a snap. To make the jig, I start off by cutting a piece of 1/2-inch plywood to a dimension of about 27 by 18. Now I used 1/2-inch plywood because that's what I had laying around. The 27-inch length will give me support for over half of the diameter of the table, and the 18 inches in the other direction should give me enough stability of the material to make a clean cut. Then I cut a shallow groove in the plywood to properly align the runner and to keep the runner perfectly straight. After sneaking up on the right width of the groove, a little CA glue holds the runner in place and lets me continue on with the project without waiting for wood glue to dry. I should tell you that before the glue up, I drew out a 38-inch circle on the material and cut each piece with the bandsaw, giving me a rough circle. This allowed me to use my same wedge method of clamping I used in the previous video, and this time I didn't screw up the dowels. On the underside of the table, I found the center and drilled a shallow 3/8-inch hole. This will allow for the 3/8-inch dowel that I'll use as a pivot point. I used a block of wood as a guide to ensure that the hole was perpendicular to the surface of the table. Now back to the jig, I measured out the 18.5-inch radius I'll use and used the same block to give me a perpendicular hole. Then I used a little CA glue to fix the dowel in place and cut it off to the appropriate length. Now I can use this jig like I would use any other table saw circle jig made on the same principle. After slicing through the bulk of the material, I carefully turned the material into the blade until I got a circle. But it wasn't perfect. I didn't make sure the material was flat against the jig going into the blade, so my edge was a little wavy. To fix this, I installed a blade stabilizer on the inside of the arbor of the table saw, which offsets the blade by 1/8 inch. This time, I held downward pressure on the material close to the blade to make sure the material was entering the blade from the same plane. Sure, I reduced the diameter of the table by 1/4 inch, but I got a really nice edge. Now, this video is more about the circle jig than the table, but I might as well let you know how the table turned out. I added an edge detail using an OG router bit, but after some sanding, I realized that a section of the glue joint didn't turn out as well as I had hoped. So when you can't hide a joint, accent it. I used a V-bit on my trim router to cut a very shallow groove along all of the glue joints. This is going to work out well because of the next step. Whenever I use a porous wood in a project, and by porous, I mean that the surface will have these tiny divots. Even if you sand out the ones you see, you uncover more that are just in the structure of the wood. Here's an example on a piece of Padauk. It's exaggerated because it's dusty, but the light streaks are the divots. They will not go away. I like to highlight the divots with a dark contrasting grain filler. So I use Ebony Timbermate grain filler, not a sponsor, over the entire top of the table, including the groove I just cut over the glue joints. Once everything is sanded back, the grain will really pop. Most times that's a good thing. On this table, well, I'm still trying to decide. But what is done, and now it's time for the finish. I'm using my least favorite finish, water-based poly, simply for the durability and ease of repair. I think it makes things look plasticky, if that's a word. But the client is king, and I will do what they want. It's not perfect, but I will call this a success. I hope I've given you some ideas that you can use in your shop. Thanks for watching, and there you go.